We're also joined this morning via satellite, I believe, probably like 10 feet away from Doug Luzader, from also our D.C. Bureau. David Mercer, Democratic strategist, founder of Mercer and Associates. Good to see you this morning. We can't hear him.
Happy New Year to both of you.
There we go. Now we got your voice. Let's start with that debt ceiling. And I don't know if you could hear Doug Luzader, but what he was saying is that this is really complicated for lawmakers on Capitol Hill. It didn't sound complicated when the new House Speaker John Boehner laid it out yesterday, laid down the gavel, the very large gavel, although Andrea says it's not the biggest one we've ever seen. But he basically said, you know what? We're going to start with our House. And we're going to cut our own office budgets by $35 million. And he said, you know what, that's just a drop in the bucket. We realize that. But symbolically, it's a big move. And then we're going to go on to cut $100 billion in spending.
Isn't that funny, though, Harris, that we're like $35 million?
Well, pea shop. But it's a start. You got to have a trickle before you have a flood. Just ask Mother Nature. It starts to sprinkle before it downpours. All right, so David.
Sure.
What do Democrats do?
Well, one, I think we saw President Obama take the lead on that by freezing federal spending, as we saw back in December. And John Boehner has followed suit with regard to congressional staff. But going with regard to the debt ceiling, I don't think there's going to be, there's no question that we have to raise the debt ceiling and that the vote will be one to do so.
Well, let me stop you there. Why is there no question that we have to go more in debt than $14.3 trillion?
I'll tell you why. As a small businessman myself, Andrea's probably a small businesswoman. A lot of Tea Partiers are small business people, and they know that, you know, we may lose a couple of clients here or a dollar there and a dollar there, but we have opportunities to regain it if we have the faith and confidence and trust in our word. And what the debt ceiling would prohibit and would affect drastically is the faith and confidence of the U.S. obligation to pay its debt. If that is not met, we have lost all of that, and people will not do business with us. So we cannot go in past March 4th with people questioning undoubtedly that we will not pay our debt. So there's a higher calling for all of us, especially those that will be pitching this vote, that the faith and confidence in our obligation to pay our debt is there.
All right. Andrea Tinteros, is he right? Do we have to raise the debt ceiling?
Well, first of all, it's unbelievable to me that David says that Obama is leading the charge against reducing the deficit. Obama has spent quadruple what George Bush spent. There's no way that Obama is leading the charge on fiscal responsibility. A $938 Obamacare bill, almost $1 trillion stimulus. I'm just not buying that. I'm just not buying that. Hold on, I'll let you go. It's my turn now. It's my turn now, David. I let you.
David, let her finish.
Will cost us $100 billion.
That is absolutely ludicrous. That any Democrat would point to Obama and the Democrats and say that they're leading the charge on fiscal responsibility. Now, what's damaging the full faith and credit of the United States would not be defaulting. It's the spending. That's damaging our full faith and credit. Now, I agree. You just, in realistic terms, I'm not one of these conservatives that stands up and says, we just default. Who cares? You really can't default on this. But you've got to put spending cuts in place. If these Republicans are going to vote to raise the debt ceiling, they have got to couple it with massive, massive cuts. It can't just be like we do every year, raise the debt ceiling. I mean, it's like giving a junkie drugs, right? Well,
no, it's
this
enabling.
heroin addict, you got to give him more drugs or I'm going to get sick. Got to give him drugs or he's going to get sick. It's the drug that's the problem, and the drug is the spending. And so I really wish Democrats and Republicans would come together on this one, and rather than just say, well, we got to raise it, we do it every year, it's going to damage the full faith and credit, I wish they would all come together and say, the only way we'll all vote to raise the debt ceiling is if we make all of these cuts. That would be responsible.
Right. Scott says, stop the spending, we are broke. JPB 53 says if we raise the debt ceiling, Andrea's right, there has to be offsetting cuts in spending. Is $100 billion enough in cuts?
Well, $100 billion isn't the number that they have had to go back on their word of cutting $100 billion, and it should be in all the headlines today.
I mean, at least we're cutting. What have Democrats pledged to cut?
Cutting.
Nothing.
Yeah. We're all coming together to cut spending, and we all need to come together to cut spending.
All right, where would you cut? Name some cuts.
Well, you have Gates in the headlines today saying he's going to be cutting the Pentagon. When's the last time we heard a Secretary of Defense saying that we are going to be cutting spending? And in a recent interview with Williams on NBC with Speaker Boehner was asked, what is he going to cut? He could not answer that question. He's got a lot of things on his mind. So,
well, what would you cut?
Gates is out here today saying we're going to cut at the Pentagon.
David, what would you
elsewhere.
cut? I'm asking you, what would you cut?
Well, a lot of loopholes.
Can you give me one?
What, in terms of loopholes?
Yeah, just give me one example of something you'd cut that you think would make a big difference.
I think we need to address corporate subsidies in a way that they lobby on behalf of all the time. I think that the earmarks was a great start. That is going to be a joint effort and bipartisan effort to cut the earmarks. And I agree that we should be doing defense spending cuts as well. I think it has to be shared sacrifice, Harris and Andrea, and that everybody is going to have to take some kind of cut on this to shoulder the burden of what we're facing.
I agree, Harrison, is shared. I just would point out it's upsetting when Republicans are saying let's make the cuts, that Democrats all they can do is criticize them and say and go after them for it. It really would be nice. And if I were Obama, I'd lead on this one. I would come out and lead.
Well,
and
David is arguing that he did with federal employees having a pay for.
But I would go further than that. If I'm him, rather than have Republicans, and we're not doing talking points now, we're doing real political strategy.
And I'm not doing talking points either, Andrea. Please stop saying that.
Republicans would, rather than beat him to the punch, he could come out and put his cuts out first. The cuts that would be more politically.
No,
David, he really
Gates
hasn't.
is going to be cutting at the Pentagon. It's in the headlines.
He really hasn't. He really has not.
Okay. Uncle Dino says cut NPR funding.
That's a
You know what? I'm not even going to get into that, but I read it. It's on the chat. Yeah, somebody tell Harry Reid that earmarks are taboo. In other words, David, a bushel of vague nothingness, Brian Conway in New York writes, because in answer to your question, where would you start cutting, people just don't feel that you picked, corporate subsidies like the GM bailout, Goldman Sachs bailout, Chrysler bailout, Union bailout. Stephen Barnier says, as this country faces more difficult times down the road, we're not out of this yet. If people are coming off the rolls because they can't find jobs, we're not out of this yet.
Yeah,
so are we talking about just no more bailouts for people, David?
Listen, it's not a matter, we have to manage our budget, just like anybody. And we had to stop the bleeding in a lot of instances. I'm no fan of the Goldman Wall Street bailout, but it had to be done, otherwise we would not have a banking system. The problem was, up until that point, there wasn't a management, there wasn't a vigilance to prevent that one day where we're notified that we have to come up with $750 billion. So we all want to be smart thinkers, not just tough talkers, in addressing this budget deficit and going forward. And I think everybody's clearly understanding that we have to make cuts.
Let's talk about the third rail. The thing that nobody politically wants to touch. I try to touch on it at least every day until we start to really cut things. And that's Social Security. I'm seeing a live posting here. Cut Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, welfare. Ouch! No one really wants to hear that.
Here's what I find it's such an important point. So you're talking about deficits, you're talking about cutting, you're talking about the debt ceiling. Democrats will come out and say, can't cut Obamacare. Republicans are going to vote to repeal it. We can't because it's actually going to lower the deficit. I would like to look back, Medicare, Medicaid, at any time when the government has gotten involved in health care. Has it actually brought down costs? The two times the government has gotten involved, Medicare and Medicaid, they're bankrupting the country. That's why I'm not buying this, that Obamacare is somehow going to be this fiscally responsible bill, which is why Republicans are right to repeal it. They're right to repeal it, but they should have replaced it with something.
Well, and there is supposedly a side-by-side piece of legislation, which one of our guests earlier in the week says it hasn't actually been written on a piece of paper. Yikes! Somebody write it down.
Paul Ryan. Make a photocopy of whatever he's got.
Don't let the dog eat that homework. But if there is side-by-side legislation, we're not going to get to see it before the symbolic vote because Republicans have, in fact, broken their own new rules, their own new set of rules. They're not holding any hearings.
Yeah. They have to repeal. They keep talking about repeal, and I wrote about this on FoxNews.com, the opinion section, about how Republicans have a real challenge. They've made some serious promises The focus is going to be on them. A lot of this, as you pointed out before, the fighting will be within the Republican Party over the debt ceiling, because Democrats say, who cares, raise it. So they have to, in their own party, figure out how fiscally responsible are we going to be. They have to figure out if we repeal it, we've got to replace it. But they also can't do what the Democrats did, and that's get so obsessed with health care, they forget the economy. I remember the people are saying, what are you
when you
doing?
Have a moment, I'll
Focus on the
respond.
economy, not health care.
We're going to have to let David Mercer go. So with a few seconds,
we're not
David, wrap
obsessed with
up.
health care. One thing, we're wondering, why are the Republicans, when everybody is concerned about jobs, 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 we're hearing Obamacare, Obamacare, Obamacare. It's done. Put it aside. It's not going to be repealed. And the time that is being wasted to try and repeal this in the House vote next Wednesday is ridiculous. And as you mentioned, Harris, they're already breaking their own promises to the American people to keep their word and to keep their focus. We're a little confused on this side of the aisle.
Actually, I didn't say that they broke their word to the American people, and I don't want to lose you off the satellite, so I'm going to have to let you go. David Mercer, thank you for being with us live from D.C.